is take a selfie with you all. Because it seems to be the trend of what to do here that I learned from the main stage. But in all honesty, I think that what I just did is pretty stereotypical for someone of my age. After all, I'm a 17-year-old girl, and actually I don't think there should be anything gendered about taking selfies, but maybe you've walked down the street and you've seen groups of teenagers with their phones out, taking pictures of themselves, doing various things, making duck faces. Do you all know what a duck face is? Can we all make duck faces? I'm seeing like some shaking heads. There are limits to the dignity that can be lost here. But as I was thinking about this, I realized that in many ways we do earn that really disparaging title of the me generation. If you walk down the street and you see all these taking selfies, you might think to yourself, well, that's not exactly changing anyone's life, that's not changing the world, and that's extraordinarily self-obsessed. And all of that may be true. I was reading this book, The Feminine Mystique, by Betty Friedan, a noted American feminist, and she wrote one of my favorite lines from the book, which is about young people. And she said, quote, "There was literally nothing these kids felt strongly enough to die for, as there was nothing they did which made them feel alive. Ideas, the conceptual thought which is uniquely human, were completely absent from their minds or lives," end quote. And she was writing in a very different time, but I looked at that quote and I realized that there's much that probably resonated with adults in modern times, looking at people my age and wondering what we're doing that actually matters. And so today's talk is trying to answer that question, but it's also a call to all of us to create tools that enable not only young people, but really everyone to have the chance to do things that matter and to present ideas that really matter. So I first thought about this thinking about my own educational experience, because my education without the internet would be a radically different one. When I was 3 years old, I started reading pretty simple books and then chapter books, and my parents realized that it would be a little bit of a waste to send this little kid who was already reading chapter books to preschool to learn her alphabet, and so I started being homeschooled. Now, my parents' definition of homeschooling was a pretty different one. They would hire all these university kids to come and talk to my sister and me about topics ranging from art history to Mexican revolutionaries. And to add to this eclectic mix, my sister and I had the chance to go online. I remember being 5 years old and setting up an email account for the first time. Not to date myself, but it was Hotmail. And I was so excited, but also the only person on email was my grandmother. And so I started emailing my grandma, and then gradually, a few years later, some of my friends got email accounts of their own, but I like to think that I was kind of an early adopter. You're probably not, but still, pat on the back. And that was an absolutely essential part of my learning experience. Because if you think back to your own days in primary school, when you were first learning how to write, how many people, how big an audience was your average audience for something you wrote? Maybe one person, your teacher. Or if you were lucky, perhaps 20 or 30 kids, your entire class. But when I thought about what my audience was for something that I wrote, I had the chance to really expand that much more. Not only was I emailing my friends, but I was also starting a blog. When I was 7 years old, I created this thing titled, pretty obviously, Adora's Blog. And I can remember that I would write about everything I learned that day, things that excited me, things that angered me. There were quite a few very radical rants on politics because I was kind of a young firebrand, and I remember just being really out there with my opinion. Now, the amazing thing about having a blog at such a young age is that it's at this crossroads of terrible grammar and unsophisticated writing, but also having an audience. And because of that intersection, my writing improved a lot faster than I think it would have if my only investment in my writing was the thought, oh, well, maybe my teacher will see this, or maybe some of my classmates will see this. I realized that I could have a footprint that was a whole lot larger than just something I wrote down on a scrap of paper and handed in to one person. And in that sense, my education was extraordinarily broadened and improved, I think, by the opportunity that I had. So that's something that has definitely shaped my view on the impact we can have with technology, just thinking about how crucial it was in my own education. But it also got me thinking about how can it be crucial in many more young people's educations. Educations is a terrible and awkward word in the plural. But I did this project called Teach Teachers Tech, where I filmed some videos over at Google for a website called Platform for Good, and I encourage you to check it out. And a lot of the videos already up on the site, and a lot of the content was about privacy and safety and how kids can be safe on the internet. And I was like, well, we've heard a lot about that, but what about how kids can be creative and ingenious, and what about ways that teachers can help spark that potential? So I discussed what would a classroom look like if instead of just handing in dioramas or projects or essays, we could do change.org petitions. because that would be a very real-world way to incentivize doing a crap ton of research at 12 a.m. And I am far more willing to pull an all-nighter to look up information and to discover things about issues I care about when it is an issue I care about, and when it has a real-world impact, and when I'm seeing thousands of signatures pour in, than if it's, again, just something that one person sees. So I made all of these very short 1 to 2 minute videos oriented towards teachers about technology with ideas like starting Change Charter petitions as an option for students to turn in projects. And I'd love to hear some of your ideas. What are some ways that teachers in modern classrooms could pull in some of the tools that maybe you all have helped create to motivate student learning? Going onto the BBC Schools website and playing all these fun games that they had there, Nobelprize.org, that was, I think, the sole reason I learned about vectors for malaria.
So we've got like the national competition in each subject, like mathematicians, Polish language, for example, and more and more. And actually what we created in Poland was the mobile app that let students, that was like a project management tool for social projects. So students could enter the application, and they had different stages of how to create the social project. I don't know, that could be a social event in the local society or anything. And they were getting points for each stage that was passed. So that was like a gamification, because we introduced this nationally, and I think at this moment we've got like 1,000 students doing social projects in whole Poland. That's called Social Loop, so that could be interesting for you.
Okay, Social Loop Poland. Awesome. Thank you so much for your really interesting contributions. I really appreciated some of the thinking on how we can bring tech into education. And I think that one thread I've been seeing throughout this is empowering students in some way, whether it's empowering them to become drivers of their own learning, or it's empowering them to connect with people around the world, or to have social change. There's so many different ways that we need to make young people, first and foremost, in charge of their own education. I think that we're in an absolutely crucial time for that to happen. So a great example of where students are really leading the charge on that comes from the student voice movement back in the States, and I think that it's really been expanding to be more global now. And so if you open up Twitter and you search for hashtag STU, like student STU _voice, then you'll find a whole lot of people who are just, or just hashtag StuVoice or at Stu_voice, sorry. Then you'll find a whole lot of students who are weighing in on the issues that matter to them in their own education. And the whole idea behind this movement is that we are the main stakeholders in education. We're the ones who go and sit in the classroom chairs every day. We deserve to be more than the people that are mentioned by politicians, by parents, and by teachers when it comes to a discussion about education reform. And they actually run a conference every year called Student Voice Live that makes technology a very big part of that, because again, it's had this very humble origin in a Twitter chat, and then it eventually got Secretary of Education Erica Duncan in the States to join in, and really brought in a lot of very influential adults to support the cause as well. So when it comes to education and education reform, I think there's a tremendous possibility for us to bring technology in, but I think that there are also so many schools and so many students for whom this isn't a reality yet. Definitely when I look at my own high school experience, it was very rare for us to use the internet or to use the resources at our disposal in ways that were particularly game-changing. I remember that my school treated it as kind of revolutionary for there to be textbooks online, and it was like, whoa, you don't have to bring books to school anymore. And I was just like, well, this is basically what we've been doing for years and years and years, just on a screen instead of on a page. Big deal. So when we think about ways to make technology central and to empower students to that, we really have to question, is what we're doing new, is what we're doing interesting, or is it just kind of reinventing the wheel? So that's my own input on that. Another area where I've found the social consciousness of my generation really being expressed very powerfully through online tools and through apps and the rest is in the area of women's rights and feminism, which I'm very passionate about. I should have worn my "This is what a feminist looks like" t-shirt, but as any of you know who saw like Emma Watson's speech at the UN, or a number of celebrities and public figures who have kind of, I wouldn't say come out as feminists, but who have spoken very publicly about championing that cause, a lot of that has been spread on people's Facebook news feeds. A lot of people have really taken to petitions, have taken to social networks to talk about this issue and why it's important to them. So there were these three girls, Alina Summeris, Sammy Siegel, and Emma Axelrod, who learned the last woman to moderate a presidential debate in the States had been in 1992. And they were like, wow, this is ridiculous, and there needs to be another female moderator of a presidential debate. So they started a change.org petition, got thousands and thousands of people to sign it, and they actually managed to essentially change the course of history while still these three 16-year-old girls in high school. And I looked at them just being incredibly inspired, realizing that is something that is decidedly achievable for a lot of folks. And another great example on that area of women's empowerment comes from a project like IHollaback.org, which works to end street harassment by getting people to share their very important, very personal stories of what they've experienced, and then just raising awareness about that overall. So these are amazing examples of people coming together on an issue that's important. But I need to see a whole lot more, I think. As a 17-year-old, I really want to see more and more of that. And I want to see, I think, people having a more consistent approach as opposed to just, oh, here's a video that's super cool, or here's a website that's super cool, and sharing it, handing it a wave on Facebook, but a more sustainable approach. So are there any examples of your favorite websites, tools, apps that you think allow people to engage with a cause over the long term and not just in the short term? Any ideas, favorites? What would you like to see?
If you could repeat that again or give us another example of what perhaps you...
Yeah, sure. Okay, so a lot of the examples that I just listed have to do with women's empowerment and feminism, but what are some examples of tools, websites, or apps that you think allow users to engage with an important cause over the long term, not just the short term, not just like sharing out one link or something, or what do you envision happening or creating in the future?
I think for younger people, certainly it's ways to harness existing technologies, so like YouTube or Facebook or ones that they use already. So perhaps looking for newer things is stepping too far ahead, and perhaps ways that people can engage now with what we have, especially younger people.
Yeah, that's a really great one. So leveraging what we have now as opposed to necessarily creating new things, I think, is a really important idea. So I think especially important, so if you look at, say, YouTube, Facebook, etc., a lot of the criticism of people my age has been, oh, well, you're just slacktivists, you're just clicking like, you're just sharing links, that's not really having an impact. So I think that giving young people ways to produce content and then actually see it working in the real world, showing how people respond to that, that's important. And I'd love to highlight more stories of people whose work, say, making a video, has actually then had meaningful change in the real world. And actually one example of that comes from my own experience. When I was 12 after I spoke at TED, then I went back home and I realized, wow, there were like no young people at TED whatsoever. And it's kind of intimidating to walk into a party or to walk into a room and just look around and realize that everyone is about twice as old as you are. And luckily that changed a little bit as I got a little bit older, but I thought there's something wrong with the idea that only older people have ideas worth spreading, or that there's only a marketplace of ideas, a form of ideas for people who are above a certain age, have already gone to university, etc. We need something like this for high schoolers, for middle schoolers, and primary school kids. So I started a TEDx event called TEDx Redmond in my hometown, and it was entirely run by youth. All of my committee members were high school and middle school students. We invited hundreds and hundreds of people. We expected that maybe there would be a turnout of like 300 to 400 people. That was our optimistic bet, because even though we were young people ourselves who were passionate about ideas, we thought, okay, there can't be that many kids who would want to spend their Saturday morning at a conference, right? We were very wrong. That Saturday morning when we threw open the doors at the Microsoft Conference Center, we just looked on in shock as these hordes of kids basically rushed past, and by the end of that day, over 750 people had showed up to our inaugural conference. And that really told me something important, which is that people are looking for venues for ideas, people are looking for places to make their voice heard. And when I also think about how TEDx Redmond happened, how we came together, how we reorganized it over the course of 4 years, the internet was really essential to that. I don't think I would have been able to organize TEDx Redmond, at least not as easily and at least not to as large of a scale as it got if I were born in the 50s or 60s. Because we ended up being extraordinarily collaborative. We used a lot of wikis, Google Docs, nothing out there super insanely cool, but we were on Google Hangouts all the time for meetings instead of necessarily pulling everyone, because this was over the summertime. And I had committee members who were in India on vacation, who were at camp, who were in college classes, and so being able to meet in the same place at the same time was not always the thing that was going to happen. So it was absolutely crucial to use the tools that we had at our disposal already, the YouTubes, the Facebooks, the Google Hangouts and stuff, and we didn't necessarily have to go out there and create something new.
And I think there's something about the informality of tech as well, that, you know, people would feel.
Maybe other people have been here that
Oh,
conversation
apologies.
started.
Tech is very informal for people, for young people, for teenagers, so it enables them to do something they wouldn't necessarily stand up or publish a book or write an article. But there's something informal about it, that if it works, and they can get their message out there, and it strips away the formality, perhaps.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. The informality of tech is an important part. It's not intimidating for me to whip out my phone and type something up and send it out on an app, whether it's Git Yak or Reddit or something a little bit more formal than that. But it can be intimidating to, you know, give a speech or to write a letter to the editor or something that is very much more traditional, formalized, and that we associate with adults, I think. Because right now for me, the smartphone is my playground. There's a whole lot more informality that I think is extraordinarily empowering. It can be leveraged in areas as diverse as education, as feminism, as organizing conferences, organizing things in general. Once you really tell a young person, hey, this can be a whole lot more than Snapchat. I mean, I love Snapchat. It can be a lot more than Snapchat and selfies. It can really be a way for you to change the world around you. If you believe those words when you say them, I think that is a tremendous amount of power right there. Now, I'd love to take any questions if you have questions.
One of my questions is, for the TEDx event that you organized, what was the age range and what were the topics that you discussed? Because as you're sitting here talking about getting youth and younger people involved and have a voice, part of me thinks, well, sometimes what are the topics that you're speaking of? And you don't want to engage some people in very mature topics at a certain age. It's kind of, it's a little bit too early. So I'd like to know what was discussed and what were the main focus areas.
Well, that's an excellent question. So as somebody whose parents had the talk with me when I was like 4 years old, I guess I was never the champion of keeping kids away from mature issues, but I totally understand what you mean. And at TEDx Redmond, we were very cognizant of that. I think our third year, we had a speaker who was a photographer and did beautiful photography. A lot of that involved people who were not very fully dressed, and we did have some complaints coming in from parents who were a little more conservative, saying like, hey, we understand this is art, but like we didn't want our kids seeing that. So we were always sort of towing the line. But I think that since our audience ranged from primary school all the way up to high school, and we had kids as young as 6 or 7 in the audience, that we generally, we didn't, you know, that was our first incident with parents ever really saying we thought this was too mature or something. But young people deal with issues that are very difficult, very mature, a lot of times on a daily basis. I know people who are younger than me who have seen a lot of stuff, which is pretty vague, but I'm sure that you all, you can look back at yourselves in your teenage years and realize that there were things you went through that may have been mature, may have been adult, but that you had to handle anyway. And I think that to ignore that reality, or to ignore that a lot of young people know a lot about things that we generally associate with, you know, you don't do that until you're 18, or you don't do that until you're 21 or whatever, would be to kind of live in a world that doesn't exist. So I think engaging with young people on pretty much all the topics out there is important. I mean, I've spoken with some of my high school's feminism club. We had a whole conversation about pornography and the different facets of that from a feminist perspective. And some people would be like, oh, well, you're not supposed to be having those conversations, you're still in school or whatever else. But yeah, it's important to engage with young people on a variety of topics in a mature way. I think that most of the time we can handle it. Thanks for that question. Any others? Yes.
One of the common topics recently is bullying, especially among teenagers in the social space. And do you see that, you know, being remedied or being discouraged or stopped or reduced?
So a question about bullying in the social space, especially between young people. I think that so much of that has to do with culture. If we look at the culture of places like 4chan or certain subreddits or any of these other places that can often be very misogynistic, very violent, etc., then that's the kind of culture that does breed a lot of you know, bullying or harassment, particularly for people who don't fit into the culture or seem to be in some way different from most users. But I've been really, really inspired by the kind of amazing interactions that I've seen on websites where people are a whole lot more, I guess, thinking about social good. And so if I think about, for instance, the interactions between people just, so I go to UC Berkeley, and on our class of 2018 Facebook page, there's a lot of stuff. People be trolling, people post random stuff, but the vast majority of the time, there will always be someone who will step in and will always say that is not okay, or this is deeply offensive to a group of people, or you should say that, and most of the time that's not even necessary, but I've been really inspired by the amount to which people stand up for each other, and I think that's when it gets powerful, is when you're educating young people on you can be more than a bystander, you can be an active participant, and if you see something, say something. That doesn't just have to be the slogan that you see on the sides in airports and subway stations. Like that can be a pretty important mantra for life on the internet too.
Thanks, hi. I'm interested in your opinion about which kind of cause brands are actually getting it right and managing to do some engagement with a broader range of people, including younger people.
Really good question. Which kinds of cause brands are doing it right and getting engaged with young people? So, do you mean specifically like companies, or do you mean more nonprofits, or either one? Either. Okay, so I mentioned iHollaback.org. I really love what they're doing around street harassment. I think that has a lot of appeal to young people. One of their, actually it wasn't a video they produced, but a video that had their logo at the end. It went viral. It was one woman's day in New York City, just walking down the street being catcalled by 100 different men. And so people were like sharing that all over the place. It did draw some criticism for the editing kind of highlighting a more racial element, which was totally valid, and they responded to that. But a little bit of a tangent there. I really love what they're doing. I think that when it comes to branding specifically oriented towards young people, that a lot of our like larger charities and a lot of the kind of more establishment organizations need to be more versatile and need to do a better job. So I trick-or-treated for UNICEF for like 10 years because I trick-or-treated on Halloween for way too long. But one thing that I noticed was that their marketing, while it worked fine for like primary school kids, that it wasn't as hip and fresh as a lot of teenagers would like to see it. So I think that learning lessons for maybe smaller nonprofits that move a little faster, things like iHollaback, it works really well.
Can we take that last question?
Oh, hello. Thank you. Hi. I think it's very important to give the voice to young people. I feel really young, so that's why I feel it's important. But I think the more important thing is to create the conversation between generations, because it's. I think the bigger issue now is the exclusion because of age, and we need to learn from experience from our parents and grandparents, because you can learn a lot, you can teach your friends a lot, you've got a lot of nice experiences, but experience needs time, and the knowledge our parents have and older people have, it's something you can't learn, you need time to have it. So I think it's really important not only to give voice to young, but also to listen to older people.
Totally agree. And I think that I just want to emphasize, if I haven't done this in the past, that technology should never be isolating as a means of isolating my generation from others, or saying we're super special or we care more about social good than anyone else. We totally have the same, I think, kind of conscience and consciousness that many past generations have had, and we want ways to build bridges between generations. One way to do that is through technology, and I think that's really powerful. I actually spoke to a group of folks who managed senior centers in Wisconsin. I know that seems like a really random group of people, but they had amazing ideas on ways to build bridges between older folks and younger folks, and I think that that's a very important part. I hope that's one of the takeaways from today. Other takeaways, just that technology can be an extraordinarily powerful tool, not just for my generation's Snapchats and selfies, but really for our ability to reform our education, for our ability to push for the cause we believe in, and to organize conferences that give voice not only to members of my own generation, but to others. Thank you so much for your attention today. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing all the things you come up with here at Web Summit.